So let's move on to the first pillar of transformative leadership communication. And I probably should have mentioned when we started, I've got an odd obsession, and my obsession is clean communication. It's just my thing. And from a very early period in my life, I can remember sitting there as a student sometimes and watching the teacher and then watching the class. And many in the class would not get it. And I would think to myself, why is the teacher continuing to move on right now? Because it's clear to me that the class ain't getting it. And this has continued for many, many years, 20 plus years now as an owner of my company. And today I have about 150 employees. So I'm constantly able to experiment with these things. Now, some of these pillars, I have essentially made them up in terms of what I call them. Now, this first one is one that's actually pretty well known. I didn't make it up at all. It's a beautiful, beautiful pillar of truth, principle of communication, and I'm curious to know if you've heard it before. It's the principle of yes and. Who's heard of that? You've heard of the principle of yes and before?
I don't think I have.
Briefly.
All right, briefly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you think you can describe it at all based on what you remember, Aaron?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
No.
So, have you ever heard of improv? Let's talk about the
Yes.
history of it. Okay, so improv, how it works is you take one or more actors and you put them on stage. Okay, and the audience gives the actor or actors the scenario, and if the crew, the actors, are good, they will be able to act it out on the fly as if they've been practicing for months. Now, the whole key for them being successful is one singular principle, which is yes and. In other words, in the moment of the act, let's say the audience throws out the scenario and says, your plane's crashing and you're the two pilots. Now go. Now you're supposed to turn that into magic. You're the first one that goes, Aaron, and you say, oh my goodness, the plane's crashing. Let's get our life preservers on. If at that point, Randy, you say, no, that's a dumb idea. Let's go grab a beer instead. That is not adding to what he just said. Whereas if you say, that's a great idea, and while we're at it, let's grab a beer in the back, now all of a sudden, it becomes funny, and you're able to build upon it.
Yeah.
And so that's where yes and started. That's its most simple, basic historical definition, but that's not really what it is with communication. We're going to look at it much deeper when it comes to communication. Yes and when it comes to communication is essentially taking everything that happens in a moment and using it to advance the conversation for good. And not allowing the energy in the flow to go to anything that is negative. And when I mean negative, that's a subtle term here. Anything that could take away from that flow and that energy of that conversation. So let's analyze this together for a second, okay? Because there's different ways that this manifests in our life all the time. All the time. Let's say you're having a company meeting, all right? And you're speaking in front of your team. What's an example that you can think of not following yes and? In other words, what's an example of allowing something to be a negative distraction instead of making it work for the moment and build the moment into a more effective experience for everyone? Can you think of one?
Well, we were acquired. Our business was acquired.
Okay.
So we had a lot of meetings about change.
Okay.
And so I think there was a lot of opportunity for this, where somebody would say, well, hey, this new system's stupid. Right?
Okay, this is great, right?
Like this is like, I can't believe we're doing this, right?
Yeah.
So an example of it being negative would be not taking that feedback, but just kind of shutting it
Right.
down.
So somebody says to you, let's play this out really quick, Randy.
Yeah.
So you got a team member, you've just gone through this acquisition. Team member says, this system they're suggesting, this is stupid. I mean, look at this thing sucks. All right. What's an example of of you taking that the wrong way.
Like just shutting them down. Like,
Go ahead and say it like you would.
like, hey, be more respectful. There's nothing wrong with this. This is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Like, just invalidate them completely.
Right. You know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just give it a chance. Chill out already.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's the wrong way. Let's talk about the right way for a second. All right. I'm gonna put it on you, Aaron. All right. And let's play it out for real. So we're gonna do some role plays as we're doing this. And when we go into a role play, here's what you want to do. You want to pretend as it's real from the very moment we start.
Okay.
You don't need to say hi. You don't need to say hello. You don't need to say it's good to see you. We just go into it like we've already been talking for 10 minutes. Don't say, well, here's what I would say.
Yeah.
Go into it and say exactly as you would say it. Does that make sense?
Does.
All right? And so let's pretend that you're going to follow yes and here, the principle yes and. All right, so you just presented this idea. I'm one of your team members, and I'm going to come back with a negative. Let's see if you can turn it into, even though I'm going to come out with a negative, you can make it a positive. And when I say make it a positive, it's by recognizing what I just said. In other words, I feel heard, but you use it, instead of taking us off the tracks, you allow us to get on the tracks with what I just said. Make sense so far? All right, ready for this, Aaron? Okay. So, yeah, Aaron, I see what y'all are saying, but we've been doing it this way for a long time. This seems like a pretty dumb idea.
And how come you feel that way?
So, you say, how come you feel that way, right? Which, did you notice his face when he said it?
I was just thinking, I'm glad I'm not in his shoes.
Right. So, what did you feel in your face when you said
it? It wasn't direct. There's a little bit of,
yeah. And so, did he look happy that I had said what I said?
No.
Yeah.
There was no smile.
It wasn't with genuine curiosity.
Yeah. You weren't too excited about it.
No.
Now, what's funny about yes and is no matter what anybody says to you, you're like, man, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
That's the power of yes and.
Yeah.
Now, there is going to be times when somebody says something so outlandish that we're not going to entertain it. Somebody says something very inappropriate, and we have to say in that moment, it's not the time for that. But we're talking about, for the sake of this conversation, legitimate moments as leaders with your team. So let's try it again. And this time, first recognize that I've been heard, right? You can say that in a million different ways, but just let me know that I've been heard. And then ask me a question. Does that make sense, Eric? Okay, so I see what you're saying with this new idea, but man, we've been doing it this way for a long time. I kind of think this is dumb.
And I get that, and we've been doing it a long time. We've been doing it really well. But what if we just tried it this way one time and see how it goes?
Okay, good. So we are already making progress. Different face this time, right?
Yeah.
So how was his first one or his second one different from his first one?
Like, it definitely, like, even just his body language, he was much more open.
Body language is more. You notice how he came out? He's like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna.
open.
Yeah, came right out. And you can hop it up another notch. So this time I want you to be the bad guy. And I want you to really play it, okay?
Okay.
All right, I know your personality, Randy. So I want you to come strong with me. Say, yo, Marcus, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard, okay? And as you're watching this right now, don't say to yourself, this ain't realistic. Because, folks, this is realistic. Live it every single day.
Happens every day.
That's right.
This was our whole morning conversation.
That's right, okay? So I want you to be bad cop this time, okay? And tell me the idea is dumb. Go for it.
All right, Marcus, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but I got to tell you, I think this is just a dumb idea. Like stupid.
Man, I'm glad that you are saying exactly what you're feeling, Randy. So let's talk about this real quick. Why specifically do you feel it's such a stupid idea?
Keep going?
You don't have to keep going,
okay.
right? Now,
let's talk about this marketing principles.
right. So in that moment, what's your impression of my face, my body, my language when you said what you said?
I mean, just the fact that you're saying, like, I hear you, and like, I'm glad that you brought that up. It does make you think, and I know this is a role play, but like instantly you're like, okay, he's gonna hear me out. Like, I don't know, and I feel like that creates creativity, innovation, because I'm willing to say, I'm willing to be vulnerable, and in return, I think you get better.
You know, I'm glad you brought up role plays, guys. Role plays can be transformative. They can be life-changing. They're a lost art. companies, for the most part, have stopped doing them, even with their sales trainings, which is a stinking tragedy. And so it is one of those things that as we do this, hopefully the viewers, as you're watching this, will see, you know what? Why haven't we been doing more role plays? Now, it takes two to play, right? It takes two to play. It takes the right mindset, the right attitude.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little awkward. But once you, at first, it was more awkward, but now that we're doing it, it's...
We just get into it.
Yeah.
You just roll. You just go, right? Which, by the way, is yes and. You just go the whole time. Now, there's other examples of yes and. This simple example. Yes and. Let's say you are in a meeting with your team and somebody's cell phone rings. What do you do? What do you do?
I mean...
What's the yes and in that moment?
I'm not sure I know, to be honest. I mean, I'd like to think
so what's the
let
principle? The principle of yes and is not allow
to be negative.
Something negative to deter from the energy of the moment. Right?
Just going back to your previous point, without being flustered, would that count as a yes and?
That's exactly right, Aaron. So, for example, if I am speaking in front of an audience and a cell phone rings, which has happened hundreds of times, do I even look over at the cell phone?
Mm-hmm.
Because the moment you look over at the cell phone, what happens? What are you giving it?
You're giving it
energy.
Yeah,
you're acknowledging
negativity.
the thing. So you don't acknowledge the thing.
Yeah.
You hear a loud noise in the background. You flinch. No. You keep moving forward because you understand the principle of yes and.
Mm-hmm. No, but I guess for me, so sometimes I would think well, you can make it a little bit comical and go right with it.
Could you use it as a funny moment? You
could. You can.
You could, right? In other words, if the phone rings and you can tell the person, if that's my wife, tell her we're just going to be 10 more minutes. Yeah. And then you can keep going as long as it's funny. Yeah. But what you can't do
is attack them in any way.
You can't attack them.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I saw somebody giving a presentation one time. Somebody's cell phone rang and the presenter said to everybody, could y'all make sure your cell phones are off? Come on. Heck, when you're in those moments and the cell phone goes off, what does everybody do anyway?
Checks their phones.
They check their phones. You don't need to tell them.
They don't want to be that person.
That's yes and, right? Now, couple of the quick examples. Customer chewing you out. Just comes and nails you.
I've never been there.
What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What's the right approach?
Make sure they're heard.
Mm-hmm.
They got to feel heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the key is you've got to literally thank them.
Yeah.
I am so glad you're bringing this to my attention right now.
Yeah.
That's the first step of yes and.
Mm-hmm. Because
the person is so ready to attack that what's going to disarm them in that moment is you immediately say, I'm so grateful that you brought this to my attention and that we can talk about this right now.
Yeah. It's just so disarming.
Completely disarming.
Yeah. Yeah, I've learned, but first you have to understand how to control your emotions to even get to that point.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about it is, if you are leaning into the principle, the principle is, how do I make this good?
Yeah.
If that's what's running through your mind, it almost doesn't matter what happens in that moment. You just keep going. Now, it's the same thing. We're using yes and in this conversation because there's going to be many times when we will mess up. We won't say the thing the right way, but we keep going. When you're on a sales appointment, you've done sales appointments over the years. You've done sales conversations over the years.
Yeah.
How many times, Randy, have you just stopped in the middle of the appointment and said, you know what, I screwed up. Let's just start the whole presentation over again.
Probably never.
Probably never. Instead, you did what?
Just kept going.
You kept going. Why did you keep going?
I don't know, that's what you do.
It's what you do, but why?
You don't want to take away from what you're selling.
That's it. You know you have a goal. That's your goal. Mm-hmm. That's yes and. And so, in life, if you do this, your first step of yes and is making it a good moment, acknowledging it for good. But once you get better and better at it, no matter what anybody says to you, you'll turn it into an incredible moment. Mm-hmm. You can even find ways to make that person the hero of the moment. Yeah. That's yes and. I'll tell you a really quick story, and hopefully you'll see the application here. All right? A yes and moment story.
Okay.
I was with a group of 500 pharmacy store owners, okay? Pharmacists and whatnot, okay? And I had just got done telling this audience, jam-packed audience, about the importance of discussing cost and price on your website. Now, if you've watched our other course on marketing and today's digital customer, you've heard us talk about this. You heard us talk about this on the video course as well. We've talked a lot about the importance of being transparent and talking about cost and price. Now, when I did this, at the end of discussing this with this audience, I said to everybody, so based on that, is it possible that we as a group talk a lot more about cost and price? And everybody in the audience essentially is nodding their head, saying yes. But one person in the back, stands up out of his seat with his hand in the air and says, but you don't understand. Now, imagine this. 500 people slammed together in a room, and suddenly this guy jumps up and says, but you don't understand. Now, how do you make that a yes and? What do you do? Because if we go down this track with this fellow, we could really be derailed from our moment here. Mm-hmm. 500 people are watching you, wanting to know what you're going to do. And yes and tells us we not only not allow this to make it a negative, but we use it to be a positive.
Yeah.
So, for the sake of time, I'll say exactly what happened in that moment. What I said to the gentleman was, sir, thank you for sharing. Real quick, what's your name? Now, already the audience is surprised. Why are they surprised?
Because you're positive.
Because I'm positive.
Yeah.
I acted like I was waiting for the question.
Mm-hmm.
He says, surprised as well, John, tell me, what do I not understand? That's not the way we do it in this industry. That's not the way we do it. You can't do that. Now, in that moment, if I try to have a long conversation with John, I can tell he's all been out of shape. We're not going to win. It's not going to be a yes and. So, in order to keep this on track, here's what I quickly did. Now, just imagine, I'm saying this to the entire audience right now. Here's what I said. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to just take a step back for a second. Look what's happened with John in the back. We all just talked about cost and price. We talked about what we want as buyers, as consumers. We talked how we would want the business to do it. Then I asked, do you do it? We all said, no, we don't do it. And that started this internal conflict with each one of us in the room. And John is so passionate in the back that not only was he conflicted, but he stood up and he expressed his frustration. And I'm going to tell you what, that's why we come to these events. And I just wish that everybody that came to these conferences was as passionate as that John in the back. Why don't we all give John a huge round of applause? And we had a standing ovation in the room. And everybody's clapping. And what does John do as everybody's clapping? He slowly sits down.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the hero? John's the hero.
Mm-hmm.
John's the hero. Now, you might say, how does that apply to business? It's all the same. It's all the same. What are you thinking, Randy?
I'm just thinking, like, you obviously practiced that a lot before that happened.
No, never. It had never happened like that.
I meant yes and. Like you.
Yes.
This wasn't like.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure people don't hear that experience and be like, oh, I should be able to do that. Like this.
No.
There takes a lot of practice.
That's
to get to
right,
that
but
point.
that's what's possible.
Yeah.
I'm trying to give the vision here.
Yeah.
The key is with yes and. The most often we're dealing it is when we're talking with team members, and they give an answer, and you say, "Yes, Randy, I hear you. Thank you for sharing that. I like how you pointed out this and this." Everybody hear what Randy just said just now? Did y'all just hear what Aaron just said? This is a great point that he just made. Constantly elevating the energy of the room, because everybody, when they give, they in turn feel fed because you acknowledge what they said. It doesn't mean you always agree with what they said.
Yeah.
But it means you acknowledge it for good and you use it for good as well.
This is a really applicable principle, as you know, to the industry right now, because there's a lot of changes occurring industry-wide.
Yep.
And there's this younger generation coming in with a lot of new ideas, technology, means and methods, and there's this older generation that's done it the same way for 30, 40 years that doesn't want anything to do with it.
Or feels threatened by change.
Threatened, whatever it may be. So these conversations are happening in this industry, especially every single day, and I get so many messages from younger people, hey, I'm a new foreman. I just don't know how to communicate with these old timers that want to keep doing it their way, even when I have a better way to make them more successful. And
That's right.
This is it.
Yeah. And the great thing is, now as we segue to the second pillar, we're really going to start to look at how can we bridge that gap that's happening in the industry right now. Because if we're principle driven in our communication, it doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter whether it's Gen Y, Z, X, title it what you want. And that's why when it comes to Build Witt leaders, what we're doing here, it's always a principle-based conversation that ideally you can apply to your business. So now let's move on to pillar number 2.